Good morning, everyone. My name is Devin Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to the third session of our Spring 2021 online learning series. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of your morning with the University of St. Thomas. Now, today's session is titled Systems Thinking, a Leadership Game Changer, and we're very fortunate to have University of St. Thomas adjunct faculty, Dr. Lynn Olsen, leading us through the topic this morning. Lynn is a very sought-after instructor in our executive education programs. He's a true scholar practitioner. He has great insights and experience on leadership tools that actually work. But before I give Lynn a proper introduction and get this session started, I wanted to remind you to mark your calendars. So the final session of our spring online learning series is going to be on Thursday, May 6th, with the wonderful Allison Smith. She teaches in our executive MBA program and our exec ed programs at St. Thomas. The title of her session is very interesting. It's Joy at Work. And she is going to be leading us in an exploration of how we view and approach our work, aiming to help us discover how we can experience joy-fueled work. It's going to be very optimistic and a positive finale for our spring series, and a great way for all of us to launch into the summer months together. So I hope that you consider joining us for Allison's session in May, but I also wanted to announce that we will be launching a summer online learning series as well. And more details are to come about our summer series, but we want to keep the learning going. We want to keep you engaged in our community, so we hope that you'll join us and tell your friends about the summer series as well. Now, as we transition to the main event this morning and hear from Lynn, I have just a couple notes of instruction for all of us. So Lynn has reserved time in his presentation at the end to respond to your questions. So we're going to be doing Q&A, and I'd want to invite you to use the chat feature in Zoom to send your questions in really at any time, starting now through the course of this presentation. You can go to the chat feature in Zoom, select all panelists as the addressee, and type your question in, hit enter. Those are actually going to come directly to me, and I will kind of serve as our moderator for the Q&A time at the end of the session. Our goal, speaking of the end of the session, is to wrap everything up this morning, as is our practice, by 8:55 a.m. Central Time, and that's to allow a little bit of passing time, so you can grab a cup of coffee before your next engagement this morning. So if you have any technical difficulties this morning, rest assured, we are recording this session, and you're going to receive a link through email a few business days from now with that recording, so that you can review the session if there's anything that goes haywire this morning for you on your end. So I think that's everything in terms of logistics for this morning, and it is really my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Lynn Olsen. So Lynn has been an adjunct faculty member with St. Thomas for over 20 years now, and he teaches a number of topics: leadership, strategy, retailing, and more in many programs at St. Thomas. He's taught in our executive MBA, our Flex MBA program, of course, our executive education programs. Lynn currently teaches in the leadership and management program, which is an exec ed offering that I have the pleasure of working on with Lynn. And in addition to his time in the classroom, Lynn also serves on the St. Thomas Adjunct Faculty Council. Now, beyond St. Thomas, Lynn is the founder and CEO of the Innovation Group, which is a Minnesota-based leadership and organizational development consultancy. He works with senior leaders on strategic growth, leadership development solutions, and he works in a ton of different industries: retail, healthcare, manufacturing, software, professional services, and more. Previously, Lynn was corporate vice president of retail operations at SuperValue when it was a Fortune 50 retailing and distribution company, and he served as a member of the senior staff for 12 years. Lynn holds a Bachelor of Science in Management degree with valedictory honors from Cardinal Stritch University. He has an MBA from the University of St. Thomas, go Tommies, and he has a PhD in Leadership and Change in the Professions from Antioch University. And one of the things that I love about Lynn is that he really embodies our promotion of lifelong learning and applicable academics. Lynn would describe himself as a practitioner first and as a scholar second. And in fact, I think that's an apt description of his career, as he first developed supreme executive leadership skills in industry before rediscovering his love for learning mid-career, a passion that really pushed him to complete his advanced degrees and has fueled his teaching endeavors really to this day. So Lynn values theory, he values his scholastic experience, but he really focuses on the tools, frameworks, the ideas that actually work and are proven to work in the real world. And for that reason, I'm very excited to have Lynn share his expertise with us this morning on the topic of systems thinking. I know this is going to be an excellent session. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Lynn Olsen.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you today, and I am going to share my screen. I'm just really excited to be able to spend time with you this morning, sharing a concept that I learned at St. Thomas. I won't tell you how long ago, but it was when I took my MBA program mid-career, and I was able to put it to work and use it effectively ever since in a variety of different ways. And I have found it to be a real game changer. So let's go ahead and get started. Why do I get so excited about this? Well, I'm a leadership scholar and leadership practitioner, and I believe that organizations need more leaders who can stop merely solving problems. We all deal with problems every day, and we tend to focus on what's immediately in front of us. But the issue of leading effective change is really much greater challenge and much more important to industry. So I think that this concept, if you take it in and put it to work, more importantly, put it to work, it can really be a difference for you because opportunities will come your way. And I'll share more about that as we go here. So what will this program do? Well, there's a concept called whack-a-mole. It's a child's game, an arcade game. I'll show you a slide on that as we go forward here. But the idea is that we tend to focus what's right in front of us. We solve a problem and then something happens. Well, systems thinking can help you broaden your view of what all it takes to execute well, not just that immediate problem. And we deal with functional silos in our organizations, and getting the right people engaged to really dig in and solve longstanding issues is something that leadership calls for today. As we do our work every day and focus on what's right in front of us, it's also very important to think about the long term and how does the work that we're doing every day feed into and support that long-term thinking, the strategies for the organizations we serve. And as I mentioned, this will help your career. How do I know this? Well, when I began my learning on this topic, I was working as a director for one of SuperValue's subsidiary companies and was charged with the responsibility to start up a brand new business function. And in the process, I did what I had been doing for the previous 20 years. And that was to look at the immediate problems and work to solve them. And what I found is that that wasn't enough, that I had to do more. So I did go back to school as a mid-career professional and finished a long-standing management degree that I had left behind about 20 years earlier, and then immediately enrolled in the St. Thomas Executive MBA program, which is where I learned about systems thinking. And that helped me do a much better job of not only solving the issues and strategy that I was working on, but to help other people get it, to be able to illustrate for them what I was really talking about, and to go with much greater in-depth thinking to move this new business function forward. And as it turned out, the parent company noticed what was happening, and they promoted me to a corporate role in the Eden Prairie office of SuperValue. So I became a parent company change executive after learning and applying these concepts. And over time, it helped me to lead substantial enterprise level change for two segments of the retail food companies group there, the retail operations group and the merchandising teams. And we led enterprise change initiatives across what eventually became a $46 billion organization. So I know that this worked for me. I've seen it work for the people that I worked with. These same concepts were taught to them, and many of those same people are still practicing these tools, helping organizations of all kinds lead substantial change initiatives. So what are we going to look at today? The things on the left-hand side of this slide is what I'm going to work through here in about the next 25 to 30 minutes. We'll first of all get some conceptual thinking in place, and then talk about how do we put it to work. I'm going to share another concept that I learned in my MBA program at St. Thomas called mind mapping, and how that is not just something abstract, but is really a solid business practice. And I'll close with some things to keep in mind about systems thinking. And by the way, I've also included in my PowerPoint deck an appendix of thoughts for you to just go back and take a look at when you get the recording. I want you to be able to reflect on what we go through today, because I'm going to be moving fairly quickly. And why am I doing this? Well, it's not just about the learning. It's really about the application. As Devin mentioned, I think of myself as a practitioner first and a scholar second. Yes, I've studied these concepts. I believe in the theoretical underpinnings of leadership and management programs, but I also focus on what works. So I would like you to be able to understand what's all going on in your business systems as you work on those immediate problems. I'd like you to be able to identify what those are and how they work together, and to look at some simple tools for diagnosing problems to a greater degree, taking into account everything that may be going on behind the scenes. And then mind mapping is really about using both hemispheres of our brain, which in itself is a system, right brain and left brain, and how do you use your whole mind to generate innovation and ideas. And finally, putting all this to work. So let's get into the conceptual. In MBA programs, systems thinking is often taught as a part of a human skills course. And you might ask yourself, well, what does that have to do with human skills? Well, let's look at some things that we tend to observe in our workplaces. First of all, the revolving door. How many times have you seen when someone has come into the organization with great promise and they're given a substantial challenge to solve? And at first it looks like they're exactly the right person to be able to do that. Then time goes on, things may get better for a while, and then they tend to not be better, in fact, get worse, and they leave. And so what do as organizations? We bring in yet another person that seems like exactly the right person to solve it. How many times have you seen this happen? And here's the whack-a-mole game. We have things pop up around the quality of our programs or products or services. We think about cost and margin. We try to solve issues there every day. What about delivery of what we provide to our customers? And what challenges do we face there? And we tend to pound these problems down momentarily, and guess what? Something else pops up just when we least expected it. And when we solve problems, things do tend to get immediately better because we've taken care of that one discrete issue that we were working on. But over time, things may get worse. And this is very common. Things often get better before they get worse. And there's some reasons behind that. This is one of my favorites. This deals with the issue of silo thinking, where each of us in the departments or divisions that we work in are really trying to solve our issues. We're trying to gain greater prominence in the organization, perhaps a few more people. We're looking for a few more budget dollars, etc. And while we play tug of war when it comes time to write the new budget, in the meantime, we're focused internally while the competition is trying to take our business away. And how many times have you experienced the old bugaboo of unintended consequences, where something seems to come out of the blue and sneak up behind us? This is another favorite. You notice on the right-hand side of this slide what the wrench and the hammer are trying to do. Very often, we pick the wrong tools, or we fix something momentarily, and then it is not really solved. It tends to pop up again and again and again. And sometimes even years later, we're trying to fix the same old issue. So why is that? Well, it's not about the parts. It's not about the individual issues. It's about how the whole thing ties together. So it's about the system in which we work. And there is a phrase that even the best people cannot solve what happens with a bad system. Thus, the revolving door. So, what is a system? Well, we tend to think of these typically around technology, and that is one definition, but it's really about a collection of interrelated parts that all work together. And so it's not about the individual things, it's about how they work together. And notice it's not just about the gears or even the ideas. It's about how are they connected, because they function together as one thing. So it's not about the parts, it's about how everything works together as one thing. And here's some examples. A family is a system, interrelated parts all working together to accomplish family goals, raise our children, live a good life, etc. The environment is a macro system where everything is connected to everything else. And you may have heard the phrase that if you can watch a butterfly flap its wings in China, it affects the weather in Minnesota. Well, that may be a bit of a stretch, but the idea of the environment as one interconnected system is absolutely a fact. We're all familiar with this one from our commutes and travels. A highway system with multiple bridges, roadways, on entrance ramps, off ramps, etc., is a system. And of course, the familiar system that we're working with even today are office tools and how those all work together. I know that most of us have more than just a computer. We also have a smartphone, an iPad, perhaps an electronic calendar, and other things to help us do our work. Some key principles then about systems thinking are being shared here because I would like you to be able to identify these when they come up. First of all, in a system, the various parts must have a purpose. In other words, if you think about your garage and you may have multiple things sitting in your garage, well, that's a storage area, but it's really not a system. The idea of a system is that everything in that system has a particular purpose that the system serves. And so when you're thinking about in the fall and taking care of your lawn care needs, well, then the rake and the hose and the wheelbarrow and so forth as your lawn care system will have a purpose. But just a random selection of things hanging in the garage really is not. In a system, all parts must be present to operate best. So if you take something away, it's not going to be optimal. And it's not only about what is present, but how they're arranged. And I'll show you some charts that will help you think about this in a business context in a few moments. Also, systems tend to attempt to stay stable, and they do that via feedback mechanisms. Now, in business, the very common feedback mechanism is whether or not your revenue is going up or going down. You know, in other words, is the cash register ringing or not? That's a feedback system. Another one might be the consumer research that you do, or another might be from an HR standpoint, a pulse survey of your associates to understand how is the organization thinking about itself. Those are feedback systems that we deal with every day, and they help us not only learn about what is happening in the system, but to recalibrate and make some momentary changes that help keep things stable. All that leads to another way to think of systems. Really, it's a series of interdependent processes that turn inputs into outputs. Now, I'll show you in a moment a business system diagram that will explain this a bit more. But when we do our work, we're taking something that comes to our desk, comes to our area of responsibility, and we do something with it and then pass it downstream to either an internal customer or an external customer. What comes into us are what are termed inputs. What we send out from our area of work are what are called outputs. So, interdependence, what does that really mean? Well, unable to be divided. If you take something away, then the system itself is no longer interdependent. Things fall apart. And no one part of a system can overcome the overall design by itself. This is why we play organization whack-a-mole. No one part of a system can be optimized all alone at the expense of other parts. So think about when it comes time to work on the budget, there's always give and take involved. When we're trying to bring someone into our team or our department, perhaps our division, where do they come from? If they come from another team or another department, then something is being taken away from that area and they have to replace that skill set. So this notion of just trying to do things in isolation is really antithetical to the term interdependent. When everything is together and working well, a system yields more than just a collection of its parts. So systems thinking then, it's really a comprehensive approach to understanding and analyzing the way that those parts interrelate and how systems work over time, not only in their own entity, but within the context of the larger systems in which they reside. And this has been around for a very long time. I'm still amazed that many people have not heard of systems thinking in the context in which I'm describing it. You would think that given where it was introduced at MIT and the fact that it's been around for over 60 years, that this would be very broadly understood, but it's not. And therein lies an opportunity for you. If you put this to work in ways that are helpful to your organization, it can really help you grow your career. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll restate it here. If anyone asks you, what is about systems thinking? This is it, folks. Everything is connected to everything else. So why is it important? If you're trying to make something better, you have to think forward about what it is you're trying to accomplish. In other words, what does success look like? How do you get there? What is the path that you're going to take? And what changes need to be made, not just in the area that perhaps immediately surrounds you, but in the greater context of the entire organization. And how will things be different? How will it not only look, but how will it feel? How will it operate? What things will be better? What things may be worse? And why is it important then to step back and take a look at things differently? There's another saying that I use in my leadership and management program that really helps my students understand the value of taking that leadership pause, that reflective step to really think forward and more comprehensively. Simply put, it's very beneficial to go a little slower earlier so that you can go a lot faster later. It's important to step back and reflect on where are we going here? And here's why. If we're just involved with problem solving, typically a problem doesn't have only one cause. There are sub-problems that are involved in that larger problem. And as we focus on the fix of a particular issue, there are other things that are lacking that we don't even take a look at, and sub-issues to those things that may come around and be an unintended consequence if we don't take care of it. So the idea is that fixing this apparent problem, that magic bullet, very often doesn't work. It may work momentarily, but not in the long term. This is a business systems model that I mentioned earlier. Excuse me. And it's fairly universal. So let me explain this by starting at the right-hand side. First of all, we focus on our customers and the outputs that those customers receive from our business system are the services, products, other offerings that we might provide, including support and so on. And then over on the left-hand side, we have suppliers of various kinds. And depending on your business, that supplier might provide advice, they might provide capital, they might provide raw materials, they might provide consulting support, or anything else. And what they bring into our business system are the inputs that you see illustrated by the arrows. And what we do is typically in the middle of this business system. And in systems thinking, it's called the transformation process. We turn inputs into outputs. And we do that with various business processes over a selected period of time and turn those inputs into outputs and send them on to our customers. The feedback loop that I mentioned earlier is illustrated toward the bottom. And at the top, you see what I've described as environmental elements. What those are various things that impact our business system, but that we can't control. So think, for example, about perhaps the cost of money, government regulation, the ethical climate, the political climate, etc. Those things all have impetus on our business system, but they're outside of our control, yet we have to take them into account when we're looking at solving major issues. Finally, the blue ribbon is meant to illustrate the culture of our organization. And the culture of the organization is a primary driver of performance. So how we think about each other, how we talk to each other, how we relate to our customers, how we relate to our competitors and our suppliers. All of those things make up the way we do things around here. And that's a very simple definition of organizational culture. What systems thinking allows us to do is to think about this whole business system in new ways, not just that immediate stepping stone of the problem that we're working on right now, but longer term. And I use the water metaphor here. If you think about when you deal with an issue and a rock hits the pond, where do all the ripples go? It's important in systems thinking and in leadership to think about where those ripples go so that when we throw our solution rock into the pond, we have an understanding of the full implications of our work. Here's a more linear way of looking at the differences behind what I've been talking about. On the left of this chart, you see various ways of what are described as linear thinking. The issues that we all contend with are in the middle of the chart. What are the expectations around our work? What about those problems? How do we listen better? What efforts do we take? And what concerns might we have, etc.? Well, in systems thinking, the way that we consider those issues is very different than what you see on the left. We understand that variability is part of the situation. We understand that we have to not just examine the parts, but think about everything that's going on. And we have to look deeper beyond the symptoms to what's going on underneath and look for patterns instead of just particular events and so on. Complex systems is yet another way to expand your thinking. When you look at the model of this car, you see that there are multiple systems underlying the skin of that vehicle, and they all have to work together for optimal performance. So the car really becomes a visual metaphor for an organization. We have various teams, we have various departments, even various divisions, etc. And they all have to work together for optimal output, optimal success of what we're trying to accomplish. So we not just need to think about the system that we own, but what about the others that surround us? When you think about those things in total, we begin to think about not just the parts, but how the work is done. What are the business processes? What kinds of patterns are we seeing? And how do these various parts relate to one another? Are they collaborative, for example, or are they competitive inside the organization? Are the patterns repeating? And if so, is there something kind of behind the scenes that are going on? And as we improve the work that we do in our department or on our team, how does that impact those that are either upstream or downstream from where we are? There are a couple of watch-outs when it comes to complex system thinking. Where we live is in the middle of the chart on the left here, the work that we're doing, our business system. Well, then we have the management system of the organization to consider, and whether those be political influences or whether they be budgetary, whatever. Then we have to think about how does this whole place design to work? Not just our company, perhaps, our organization, but what about the industry that we work within? And then what about the industry in the context of the totality of the global industry? And how does everything fit together? So there are always multiple contexts for us to be aware of. Depending on the information that you receive, it's helpful to think about not just what's going on around us, but elsewhere in the industry that we serve and the whole world. And it's important to understand that stability in and of itself is not the answer, because complex systems will self-adjust through these various feedback loops and try to stay stable for as long as they can. And sometimes when things seem to be going okay, something will happen, something perhaps even catastrophic will happen. And I know that you've all experienced this. If you've ever witnessed a situation where you hear about someone who was taken ill or perhaps even passed away, and you're surprised because you saw them not too long ago and they appear to be just fine. And then something happened. And this happens in business all the time. We get surprised by the things that we don't see. So how do we see more? Well, we have to think about the fact that we have filters. We have our own biases and our own ways of seeing things. And the term used for that is the way we view the world is through a mental model. We have our own skills, our own learning, our own experience. We have our own paradigms of the way that we see the world. And that forms a filter by which we view things and we form opinions. And the ladder of inference is a tool that helps us understand this. The information that we stand in every day helps drive our thinking. We make observations. We select data that we then make assumptions about and make meaning from, and even form hard, beliefs about. And we act on the basis of our beliefs. It's important to ask yourself, how widely are you casting the net of information that you take into account? It's important then to not just make things up on our own, but to solicit input from others, to get other perspectives. And at the same time, when we are taking an idea forward, we have to really focus on how do we explain that to people. And you may have experienced the fact that just about the time you're growing tired of talking about something that you find meaningful, other people are just starting to get it, or they may be just hearing it for the first time. And it's important then for you to realize that they may have a different pool of information, and it takes a while for yours to get into that pool so that they can see your way of thinking. So here's a critical question. When we look at the world out in front of us, what aren't we seeing? We need ways to go beyond that narrow perspective and to take into account new ways of seeing things. So here are a few tools to help you do that. When we're trying to look more holistically at the parts and the interrelationships among them, there are some basic tools that will help you do this. One is called the causal loop diagram. And that simply illustrates, if you look at this chart on the left-hand side, we have a condition of interest or something that we're working on in the middle. And the actions that we take feed into our attempts at a solution toward that condition of interest. The circles on the right-hand side, on the other hand, are the things that may slow us down, a limiting condition. And this is a very simple diagram, but it's amazing how often we don't think about those limiting conditions. Do we have enough money in the budget? Is there enough time? Do we have the skills? Do we have the technology support, etc.? And it's important to identify not only what are we attempting to do on the left-hand side, but what things may slow us down on the right. And then we also have to look at the issue of limitations being part of the system. In other words, don't get angry about it. Don't get upset about it. Just understanding that it's normal. And so if we can anticipate those limiting conditions and help create breakthroughs around them by engaging others to help us do our work, we can then create a breakthrough that will take us to a better outcome. The Mckinsey model has been around for about 50 years now. And you notice that they call this the 7S model for what is a fairly apparent reason. But what they're talking about here is not just the various things that go into the makeup of an organization, but notice the blue lines. It's about the connections among them. And Mckinsey and I stress the fact that it's the relationships that matter as much as what you see in those circles. So you have to ask yourself, how is everything working together as one thing, one system? What are you looking for in the use of tools? Well, here are the areas that can really help you with your career breakthrough. If you find redundancies, things being done over and over, when they could be done once more effectively, well, then there's some process improvement that can occur. If things are missing, or if decisions are being made by too many people, or if you have dead ends where you're doing things, but there's really no customer for it anymore. I'm not sure about you, but I know I used to get a lot of reports that I never looked at. And so I finally got enough courage to just tell people to stop sending them to me, because getting them and filing them was taking time away from more productive work. If you have inputs but there's nobody really there, or you only have limited suppliers, we need to think more broadly. So these are ways that you can look at the patterns of what's happening and think about those redundancies or gaps or endless loops, and over time take a longer term view and find ways to make improvements. The iceberg is another very common metaphor, and very simply, what I'm talking about here is not just reacting to what just occurred. The above the waterline things are important, but they're not the whole story. Have they happened before? Can we anticipate them again? What is really causing it? What's going on in the design of our team or our department or greater company? How is our mental models, how is our current thinking even contributing to the issues? And a way to get into this is through what's called a banded process map, where you simply map out in sequential order what happens in a given business process, who all is involved on the left, what steps are taken over time, and what kinds of things are under consideration by those various people. Mapping this out can be tremendously valuable. So mind mapping, very quickly. We have two sides of our brain. Let's use them. Typically, the right brain is thought of as the more creative, and the left brain is thought about as the more linear or analytic part of our brain. If we employ both sides together in brainstorming and problem solving, it can really help. And mind maps are a tool, again, that I learned at St. Thomas and have been using ever since. You simply think about your key topic in the middle, and that looks very organic for a reason. Again, the brain is an organic tool that we have. So you think about, first of all, what is that central idea? What are the subcomponents of that idea? What things do we have to consider? And then what things feed into that? Sketching things out very quickly, and especially in groups, can be very helpful in creating innovative solutions. And it helps us overcome that linear thinking that I've talked about before. It really is a brainstorming tool, and it can help you do everything from plan out an important phone call that you have to make, prepare a speech or a report, or even designing a training course, much like this one. I used a mind map to develop the material plan for this that we're going through together today. And these can be done either sketching out by hand, which is a lot of fun. And for those of you that are more inclined to using software, there's a lot of freeware or for profit companies that make software tools for mind mapping. I encourage you to take a look. So here's real quickly some things to keep in mind, and then I'm going to turn it over to Devin. Systems thinking is a leadership responsibility. If you're leading a small team or a project, perhaps a business unit or even an enterprise level, it's a way to gain both efficiency and effectiveness. And thinking more broadly, thinking systemically about what all is going on here is a leadership responsibility. It can help you with your career. You can stop playing whack-a-mole and get to more lasting solutions. A broader view will help you not only think about your immediate problem, but what all it takes. And bridging those functional silos, walking away from internal tug of war, can really be helpful. Leading strategically while you're working day to day on your tactics, and gaining opportunities to boost your career, all can come from the proper use and diligent, intentional use of systems thinking. So with that, I'm going to just briefly introduce that I've included an appendix of things for you to keep in mind. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing today. I'm just going to briefly walk through them. But these are things that at a point in time, you may want to just go back and pull out a slide and say, I can make some value out of this particular reflective slide. Challenge your mental models, question those assumptions, and note those interdependencies. And finally, remember that everything is connected to everything else. By the way, folks, there are no simple solutions. That magic bullet just doesn't exist. So please think about systems thinking as a way to help you get to a longer term, better outcome. And I promised that this was helpful to me. And so I've included what I went through many moons ago to help people in a visual mode thinking about what I was talking about. I actually mapped it out and was able to share it with my colleagues. And when I put it into visual form, they said, now I get it. Now I understand what you were saying. And frankly, this became a high-level framework for many years of beneficial improvement work that my teams did along with me and my partners in my corporate career. I've given you some additional resources to consider if you'd like to go deeper. And with that, I'll turn it over to Devin.
Well, thank you, Lynn, so much for the presentation. I personally find this topic to be fascinating, and I can see a ton of different ways where it could bear on my work to improve the way that I work and the way that I approach things. I think judging from the questions that are coming in, other people feel the same way and are similarly curious about this topic. So for our remaining time, we have just a few minutes, but let's transition to Q&A for the end of this time here.
Sure.
One question that came in I thought was excellent. I'd like to pose this one first. How can individual contributors leverage systems thinking to affect change when they don't have formal authority?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a terrific question. And there is a term in leadership education called act like a leader, think like a leader, act like a leader. When you are in a position without formal authority, please still remember that you have leadership capability. I would describe it this way. There are three ways of thinking about leadership. One is that iconic leader from the front type of individual, the one that we all recognize so much and that tend to show up on the front pages of the various magazines that we read. Then we have the issue of the leader from the side, that trusted advisor that we go to for a second opinion, or the meeting before the meeting. You all know who I'm thinking about there. And then there's the leader from the rear, which very often fit the model that you just described. These are the experts, the people who have very strongly held feelings and beliefs, expertise that they have to help the organization move forward. And I think it's important for folks in that leader from the rear position to remember that they have a responsibility to kind of poke at the organization with a sharp stick. Raise your voice, bring your ideas forward, put it into graphical mode, show people what you mean, have the conversations with the trusted advisors, and build support for your ideas with those people that have like mind and are willing to help you speak out about those important issues. And very often, simply going to someone and saying, I have an idea or I have a concern, let me share that with you. And to bring system thinking into play, where it's very obvious that you're looking beyond the initial problem to the systemic impact, people will kind of take a step back and say, oh, that's a deeper level of thinking than I expected from you. And it can help you deal with your own career limitations and get beyond that and perhaps gain authority that you otherwise might not have.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn. I have another question here that's really relevant for our times. I think a lot of people would benefit from this. The person who sent this in said, this last year challenged our ability to map out and think long term.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we balance our quick thinking and constant change through COVID, an example like that, to a more balanced, longer view going ahead from here?
Sure. Well, organizations of all kinds are thinking about this. Particularly when you think about the hospitality and retail industry sectors today, trying to refigure how do they go forward as the light starts to show up at the end of the tunnel here. It's very important. So my advice is to think systemically and about patterns. So the first thing to do is to take stock of what has happened. In other words, what have the systemic impacts of COVID done to our organization, and to do what I call declaring reality in clear and unambiguous terms. What things have happened, what things look to be non-recoverable or unrecoverable, and which things may seem to offer new opportunity. Then when you take that forward and start to think about those new opportunities longer term, the idea of what's described as writing your organization's history backwards. In other words, projecting yourself forward to where these new opportunities might take you. And then thinking backwards about what steps will it take to get to that new reality will help you. And system thinking is right at the core of that, because it will help you do if you do process mapping, causal loop diagramming, and many other tools that are available in the literature sources that I shared. You will be able to reconstruct a new path forward, thinking about that new outcome that you're looking for, and then be able to say, what are the phases that we have to work through to get to that new outcome? And it's hard work, it's creative work, but I encourage you to get other people engaged in that and think forward to where you want to get to, and then work your way backward. This idea of writing a narrative, a strategic narrative, is really important. Just think about what all is it going to take, and then put it down on paper.
That's great and helpful, Lynn. We've got time maybe just for one more question, and I'm getting flooded in the chat with all these great questions, but we want to be respectful of time. How about this last one? Could you say a little bit more about how best to coach others? How would you go about sharing maybe some of the resources you've included, or these techniques, these frameworks, with a team at your workplace?
Sure. Thank you. Well, that is exactly what I hope comes out of this time together. I want this material to help you, and I really hope that you share it within your team or your department and with others. The way to do that is to think about something that you are facing today, and to perhaps read a bit, go back over the material that I've presented today, and to think about how do you now think differently about that particular problem that you're trying to illustrate. Try out a few things. Get with a few people that you trust and show them what you have in mind. And then take it forward to perhaps a bit larger audience and say, I learned about this concept and I've tried it out. It seems to have helped me. Give me your feedback on what you think about what I have here, this new work product that I've created. And little by little, people will come along with you. I can tell you that was my experience. That was exactly what I went through when I was a director at this subsidiary company. I was talking my head off about what I thought was necessary to be done, and people simply said they didn't get it. It wasn't until I put it down on paper, used graphical means, shared my thinking in a very open and non-threatening way, that people said, okay, now I understand what you're talking about. Let's dig into this and let's explore it a little further. And I think you'll find people being very receptive, because they deal with the same challenges you do every day. And people are tired of fixing things over and over and over and watching that revolving door spin.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn, so much. We're going to close down for time here. Thank you for everyone else's time as well. We hope that you enjoyed today's session. If you're looking for additional professional development opportunities, please check out our website for a list of spring coursework. If you liked what Lynn was talking about today, Remember, we offer the Leadership and Management Program. It's one of our exec ed offerings. It's coming up on April 26th in a live virtual format. You can spend a lot more time with Lynn there. And don't forget that our next session is on Thursday, May 6th, where Allison Smith will lead that interesting session titled Joy at Work. You're not going to want to miss that. So thank you all so much for joining us at the University of St. Thomas this morning. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Be well.